All right, everybody, welcome to Overtime. I'm your host, Joseph Bruin here, the All Axxess Entertainment Podcast with the bonus segment known as Overtime. Our guest this week, Brian R. Solomon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with you on Overtime. I guess this is like Bill Maher's show. Do we do that kind of thing where he has Overtime on YouTube? Whether it is or not, I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's a little play on, the name game, I guess you can say. So
Sure.
we'll throw a few names at you and kind of throw a story or some comments, and we'll go from there. The first one being The Body, Jesse Ventura.
Well, I never got to work with him. I'd love to. I'd love to have gotten him even involved in the book. He wasn't I tried very hard and I just could not get him. It was not for lack of trying. But I mean, he goes down in history. Great. I mean, the first really major wrestling heel commentator, especially in the WWF. I want to point out Roddy Piper had done it in Georgia Championship Wrestling and in Mid-Atlantic and was very good at it. And he was on national audience with TBS, but Jesse really set the standard, made the mold that everybody's trying to still live up to today. And I don't know if anyone ever did it better.
The great Lou Thez.
Boy, I was very privileged to actually get to know him a little bit. I got a signed copy of his book before it was even published, in manuscript form. I had a few phone calls with him when I worked at WWE because he was a great friend of Kurt Angle. So that was my angle to write the story at WWE. And it was so funny. When I interviewed him, I put him on speakerphone and I had a crowd gather in my office to listen. And, we talked about Kurt Angle for 5 minutes, and the rest of the hour, I wanted to pick his brain about Farmer Burns, Strangler Lewis, Joe Stecker, Antonino Rocca, all Buddy Rogers, like everyone he'd ever been around. And it was fascinating. Another one of those like bucket list moments of my career.
Wow. Former WWE announcer Sean Mooney.
I just had him on my show. I don't know if that's why you're asking me that.
No.
But before that, I had never met him or encountered him at all. I had him on Shut Up and Wrestle. He was someone I tried to get him for the Gorilla Book. Our paths did not quite connect. And I think he felt bad about that. And then so he came on the show, told a bunch of Gorilla stories. He represents a place and a time in the WWF when they had really taken over the world, like that late 80s into the early 90s period. So there's a lot of nostalgic memories for him from me, the event center is probably the thing that pops to mind the most. He was good at what he did.
Hall of Fame ring announcer Howard Finkel.
Well, as you heard on the episode I did with you, a great friend, a dear man, a very good man who never, I think, quite got the credit he deserved from that company. Sometimes I felt like I can say this now, but I felt like he could be taken advantage of, and because he'd go along with anything. And I don't think they ever appreciated him enough. He was a treasure to have working there, and nobody had a bad word to say about him.
Handsome Harley Race.
I always thought that was an ironic nickname, but I think he got it maybe when he was very young. But I met him once at the Savas Center in St. Louis when WWE was doing Raw there. They invited him to come down, and I don't know if they were doing anything with him or if he was just there visiting, but I remember I saw him in catering and he was sitting by himself. And I said, this can't stand. I got to go over there. This is ridiculous. And I sat down next to him and talked to him. And I did a little impromptu interview with him. I think I used it for a .com story. And we talked about the NWA title and what it meant to him and being the king and all that other stuff. And it was such a privilege to get a chance to talk to him. But I mean, he set a standard as the NWA world champion in his day. And it's nice to see him get more recognition now for that. Whereas there was a time when all fans just cared about was the king, Harley Race, which was really like the tail end of his career and by far not the best years of his career. Maybe for his income, but not for his wrestling output,
And another former NWA champion, Jack Briscoe.
Boy, so I know Jerry very well. Jerry worked for the WWE, and so we encountered each other a lot there, and I've spoken to him even more since. Jack, I never got to have any dealings with, but for my money, I think Jack Briscoe was not. I mean, this is not even a matter of opinion. He was the most accomplished, I think, amateur wrestler, legit wrestler to ever hold the NWA World Title, and he was probably the finest legit pro wrestler of his day. I think maybe the only time I ever heard a story of him getting kind of beaten in a shoot, it was Danny Hodge. But Danny Hodge was a junior heavyweight, and Briscoe was not. But with Briscoe, he also was the last of those kind of sports star styled NWA world champions who were not playing an overt heel or an overt face. They were just presented as, this is the best wrestler in the world, and they could work with anybody. After Briscoe is when you start to get into that idea of, we need the heel world champion who pisses everyone off wherever he goes. And you got Terry Funk, and you got Harley Race, and you got Ric Flair. So that changed there. Before Briscoe was more in that mold of like Lou Thez, Pat O'Connor, Dory Funk Jr. He was the last one of that type.
Yeah. And you mentioned heels, one of the great heels of pro wrestling, Roddy Piper.
Got to interview Roddy for hours at a photo shoot that we did in Utica, New York for the Greatest Villains magazine. He'd been voted number 1. We talked about everything under the sun. He was so giving and so kind. I published the interview on Shut Up and Wrestle in its entirety because I only used parts of it for my printed interview. He was so candid. He talked to me about everything. We became friends after that. I remember I called him when he had to have surgery. I forget what it was for. And then he called me back. He left a message on my answering machine that I cherished, wishing my family a Merry Christmas and everything. And, I saw him at the Garden in the middle of the ring, putting over our Villains magazine. And I was standing a few feet away, in the gorilla position. And this was like on Monday Night Raw. And that was a big pinch me moment for sure.
Wrestling manager and, of course, member of the Gentrys, the Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart.
Yes, Jimmy Hart. So I got to be around Jimmy when Hulk Hogan came back. And so Jimmy was back with him and doing things in the company in like 01, 02, 03. But it was more in later years that I got to been around him a lot. He comes out to Cauliflower Alley Club every year now, and he MCs a lot of things, and I've seen him at conventions. Another one of the nicest men in wrestling, really. Again, everybody loves him. Nobody has a kind word. There's nothing bad about him. You can't find a single bad word or bad thing that he did. He's just a kind and sweet man.
Former WWF announcer and host Todd Pettengill.
Well, I only know him as a fan, and I remember, I feel bad. Well, I grew up in Brooklyn in New York, and so Todd was one half of a morning radio show on WPLJ 95.5. It was him and Scott Shannon in the early 90s, and I think this is where Vince himself heard him on the radio and thought that he would be a funny, cool guy to bring in. They were looking to get some new talent in, younger announcers and things, and I thought he was kind of funny, but to me, he represented an era in the WWF when it was getting more goofy and more cartoonish, and I felt like I was getting too old for it. So even though I thought he was a funny and talented guy, he represents a time in the WWF that I was starting to become less interested. I was getting more interested in WCW and ECW around that time.
Right. Sensational Sherry Martel.
Oh man. She's got to be, I know it's not a wide field, but she's got to be the greatest female wrestling manager ever. And definitely on a short list of the greatest managers, period. Yeah. Very talented. She could work. She could bump. She had a great promo. Probably one of, if not the very best performers to come out of that Moolah school and that Moolah era. They take a lot of flack, those Moolah girls. For a lot of people felt at the time they didn't know how to work. It was this closed society. They only wrestled each other. Moolah kind of held it with an iron grip. So a lot of them didn't have the best rep in wrestling, but Sherry did. Sherry was, I think, maybe the best talent of that entire crew.
The man behind the Cocoa Butt, Bobo Brazil.
I got to learn a lot about Bobo when I wrote Blood and Fire, because Bobo was the Sheik's greatest in-ring rival, even though they were great friends in real life. So I learned a lot about him. He also comes up in the Gorilla book because he and Gorilla were great friends. And Maureen, actually, Gorilla's wife, met Gorilla because her sister-in-law was Bobo Brazil's babysitter, of all things.
Oh, wow.
And so, I mean, like it's been said many times before, but he's the Jackie Robinson of wrestling. Even though I want to point out, like a lot of great authors like Ian Douglas and other people have illustrated, he was not the first, black wrestling star, but he was really the one that broke it wide open in the TV era, and he made it more acceptable to have interracial matches, which were a big no-no once upon a time for fears of riots and things. And to have a black guy wrestling a white guy and it being totally fine, and the black guy getting cheered was a very big deal at the time. So his role in history is huge.
And 2 names to go, one being Bruno Sammartino.
Boy, I'm again biased. I grew up in New York. Bruno was God. I mean, Bruno was like a part of people's families. You'd have these little old Italian ladies. They would actually have framed pictures of Bruno on the wall. And it might be up there with Frank Sinatra or the Pope. I mean, like legit. So I think I wrote about this a while back. I think, the knock on Bruno was always that he was not national, right? He was a regional star. He was in the Northeast. Now, that's partly disputed because he did well in other markets. He did well in Florida. He wrestled on the West Coast. He wrestled in some other places now and then. He went to Australia and Japan. But yes, it's true. The Northeast was his domain. However, I think you got to call him the number one biggest and greatest territorial wrestling star that there ever was. And I think the only one people bring up to argue with me when I say that is Jerry Lawler, which I understand that, but no offense. Memphis and being the biggest star in Memphis or the biggest star in Tennessee is not the same as being the biggest star in the entire Northeastern United States, including New York City, Philadelphia, Boston, Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh. And not only that, but being on national newsstand magazines for years on the cover so that fans everywhere knew who you were, even if they never saw you. Call me the obnoxious New Yorker all you want. I will own that. But in my mind, Bruno trumps Jerry Lawler as the greatest number one territorial star there ever was.
And last, but certainly not least, Walter Killer Kowalski.
So he had a wrestling school in Massachusetts, which I knew a lot about as a kid because my uncle lives in Massachusetts, not far away from where it was. It was in Malden for years, and I think in another place too before that. But he was a big influence on Gorilla's career. He helped make the introduction to Vince McMahon Sr. They got to know each other in Japan. They became great friends because Killer was already a huge star for like a decade, even before Gorilla even got in the business. So he was very instrumental in getting Gorilla Monsoon's career going. But I mean, you got to put him on the short list of the greatest heels of all time. He's got to be up there. Just a massive draw, a national star, and really international, a big star in Canada, big star in Japan. He's on that short list, especially from that era. It's like Buddy Rogers, Gorgeous George, Freddie Blassie. Kowalski is right on that list with those people.
Well, for Brian R. Solomon, I'm Joseph Bruin. This has been Overtime on the All Access Entertainment Podcast. Brian, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Joe.